It's not yet a century and a half since Carpen's first motor car hit the road, and people immediately started racing to ride the new invention. But it was not only the owners, but also the car manufacturers who quickly recognized the promotional value of racing. The first two forms of competition being to set speed records and to cover the distance between two distant stations as smoothly as possible. The latter could then bring new orders to the manufacturers of successful models. The cradle of motor racing, although it is easy to think that it was Britain, but it isn't. It was France eventually. The first official race was held over the 126 km distance between Paris and Rouen on the 22nd of July 1894, and for Count de Dion, who won the race, needed 6 hours and 48 minutes to complete the distance with an average of 19 km per hour. It is less than 12 miles per hour. The next important milestone was the 1903 Gordon Bennett Cup, which pioneered the concept of the closed circuit in motor racing. It had a sad story, of course, because up to that point the races had been held on open country roads, where unfortunately spectators, pedestrians and drivers had all been victims of accidents. The race itself still took place on public roads, but these were closed for the duration of the event, and thousands of police officers and car club marshals were deployed to ensure that spectators and passers-by stayed off the track and away from the bends where there was the greatest chance of slipping out. 3 years later, in 1906, the concept of the Grand Prix was born. Organized by the Automobile Club de France and based at Le Mans, it was a roughly triangular 105 km event with 6 laps to complete each day. This race was won by Hungarian-born Ferenc Sis at the wheel of a Renault. The 24-hour race, which is 100 years old this year and runs on the same track ever since eventually, partly on closed roads and partly on built sections, is 13 kilometers and 626 meters long. Current form is the oldest still existing endurance race in the world to date, and as such is one of the pillars of the Triple Crown of motorsport alongside the Indianapolis 500 and the Monaco Grand Prix, which has been achieved by only one driver so far, Britain's Graham Hill. The 24 Hours of Le Mans, unlike most races today, is not about who can complete the fastest, a set number of laps or a set distance, but about who can go the furthest in 24 hours. And teams do go far, as they now cover well over 5,000 kilometers, more than 3,000 miles. The record in this respect was set in 2010, when the winning Audi R15 Plus TDI did 397 laps, which is more than 5,410 kilometers, 3,362 miles. This is the same distance what Formula 1 drivers did in a season a few years ago, where the rule states that the distance of a race must be exceeding 300 kilometers. So the Le Mans record distance equals to the distance of 18 races in Formula 1. So let's take a broad look at the last 100 years in terms of winners. The very first race, held on 26-27 May 1923, was won by André Lagache and René Leonard at the wheel of a Chanel Walker Type U3 15CV Sport, followed by the Bentley years, which were temporarily taken back by the French in 1925 and 26 with the Laurent Dietrich, but the British dominated the circuit until 1930. Only to be followed by Vittorio Iano's masterpiece, the all-conquering Alfa Romeo 8C, for 4 consecutive years. The second half of the decade saw a Lagonda crossover and the success of the home side again, with models of Bugatti and Delahaye, only for World War II to send the already outstanding event into a 10-year enforced rest. For a decade or so, from the 1949 relaunch, the British and Italians shared the championship, with only Talbot Lago and Mercedes winning one each. The two dominant brands during these years were Ferrari and Jaguar, replaced by Ferrari's domination of the early 1960s, followed by the legendary 4-year heyday of the Ford GT4. The 1970s then brought a more mixed period, but it was still the various Porsche models that took the top step of the podium most often, but not with the overwhelming dominance of the dominant brands of the previous periods. The 1980s, on the other hand, saw the birth of the Group C series, which thrust the throne into the hands of Porsche, which retained it for 7 years. They were followed by victories for Jaguar, Mercedes and Mazda, before the category was finally emptied and Peugeot dominated the last 2 years. The period that followed was the era of GT cars, with legendary models such as the McLaren F1 GTR, the Porsche 911 GT1, the Mercedes-Benz CLK GTR and the Panos lining up on the grid. The victory of the BMW V12 LMR in 1999, however, ushered in not only the new millennium, but also the era of the VW groups, with mostly Audi dominating the LMP category, which was capped by the 3-year reign of the Porsche 919. The latter were already hybrid-driven models in their own right, which is why Toyota, a pioneer in hybrid technology, is back and crowned with a 5-year success story. Finally, we come to the winner of this year's centenary race, the Ferrari 499P, returning to the category after a long hiatus, and in a fierce and exciting battle with Toyota and Cadillac, who are now in 3rd place on the podium. So let's see how the biennial Le Mans Classic is run these days. Teams start to take up their allocated places in the paddock on Wednesday, while administrative checks start at the office on Wednesday morning and initial scrutineering in the paddock in the afternoon. Anyone used to the Hungaroring, Brno or the Red Bull Ring would not be able to comprehend the size of the paddock and the entire facility. Of course, it's necessary because there are nearly 800 cars in 10 categories and the grids look like these. First, from the beginning, from 1923 to 1939 until the outbreak of World War II. The second, the years of post-war revival from 1949 to 1956. Third, the narrow 5-year period between 1957 and 1961, also known as the Golden Age. Fourth, followed by a mere 4 years between 1962 and 1965. Fifth, 1966 to 1971, the era of the Ford GT40 and the Porsche 917K. 6. Finally, the cars of the era between 1972 and 1981, until the introduction of the Group C, rounded off the series. So far, these were the categories of the official participants of the race, but as a supplementary race, the drivers of 4 other grid races were included in the program. These are the 7th Group C cars, 8th, the ERL, Endurance Racing Legends, covering the period from 1993 to 2010. Finally, 2 categories reserved for brand enthusiasts. 9th, the Benjafield Challenge for pre-war Bentley owners, and 10th, the Porsche Classic Race Le Mans for the fans of Porsche who are 75 years old this year, provided an additional racing opportunity which many of them took advantage of, competing in both their own aero race and the race for their club. Once the driver has passed the administrative check, during which he or she receives his or her starting number, the initial scrutineering takes place, which varies slightly depending on the age group, but the aim is to ensure that the participants start the race in cars as close to period as possible, but as safe as possible for the era and the car's capabilities. I myself was assigned to the oldest cars, the 1923 to 1939 age group, where, as in all of the other groups, there were 4 technical scrutineers, an administrator and another scrutineer who only checked the driver's equipment. We worked in pairs to check the lined up cars. Since this era had almost no rules in its time, apart from the fact that cars were divided into categories according to the capacity of the engine, the basis for the inspection of a car is the HTP, Historic Technical Passport, a special logbook for that car, which is drawn up in a FIA template with help of a person authorized by the Car's National Association and then approved by FIA and FIVA experts who are familiar with the type of car concerned, or sent back with instructions for corrections or repairs. This HTP contains all the basic data specific to the car and appropriate photographs to help better identification. During the initial scrutineering of the car, we check visually that the intake part is the same as the one on the document and that the exhaust side matches to the original. For example, a number of Bentleys have showed up with the original collector manifold on the exhaust side replaced by a 4-in-1 system. Modifications of this kind give rise to a so-called non-conformity procedure. Under this procedure, it is up to the stewards to decide what sanction to impose on the competitor. For the most common cases, there is a predefined penalty table, such as using a generator instead of the dynamo in a model that is not fitted with one, or possibly trying to hide it by installing it in the dynamo housing. Once the cars had been inspected in this way, the next step was to check that the safety equipment and lighting were in working order and in good condition. In this respect, the regulations are quite permissive, as it is possible to enhance the capabilities of one's inefficient lighting by adding additional lamps and modernizing the structure of existing ones to a certain extent, but the limit is reached for halogen bulbs. More advanced solutions can no longer be fitted to cars, so projector, xenon and LED lamps are out of the game. Finally, the type and condition of the tires were checked. In the newer categories, in addition to the extinguishing system, the inspection of seats, safety belts and rollover protection structures were also part of the acceptance procedure, as the FIA already had a set of rules for these periods, and the Appendix K also contains specifications for the various devices. After the initial scrutineering, which had to be completed by Thursday evening, Friday was a training day. The official categories of the competition all started the day with qualifying sessions, separated by age group. While the pit lanes saw the fields take turns, the event's main sponsors gave lucky winners and clients the opportunity to get to know the track as passengers in the brand sportier models. During lunchtime and other times as set out in the program, cars from the various clubs ventured onto the track for an exhilarating drive for their proud owners. And there was no shortage of them, with 9,200 club cars on display around the track. So there were always enough entries to cover every corner of the 13.5 kilometers of tarmac. Meanwhile, the technical scrutineers were not idle either. We helped to line up the cars in the right place on the pre-grid and then checked the safety equipment of the cars and the drivers. We checked that clothing was being worn correctly and that the extinguishing systems in the cars were armed or that the lights were working during the night sessions. After nightfall, which here meant around 10:30 or 11, the night training started, so that everyone could also experience what it is like to race into the darkness of the night with the lights barely flickering. The morning of Saturday saw the start of the races. The endurance racing legends, a field of the youngest cars, opened the day's action, followed by the Porsche Classic Race Le Mans, where the atmosphere was raised even higher by the roar of 45 unprecedented amount of Group C cars before lunch. After lunch, the program continued with a parade of 30 cars that were the actual winners or category winners of the race in a given year. These cars were often driven by celebrities who had previously won here at Le Mans, such as 5-time Le Mans winner who raced in Formula 1 as well, Emanuele Pirro, 6-time Le Mans winner and runner-up in Formula 1 in 2 seasons, Jackie X, or the record holder for the number of wins, Tom Christensen, who has stood on the top step of the podium 9 times in the famous 24-hour race. Before the official start of the race, there were 2 more supplementary sessions, a race of pre-war Bentleys and a parade of children, mainly children of the drivers competing in the race, called Little Big Mans, where children aged 5 to 13 years old jumped into their cars with miniature replicas of the famous cars at the starting signal of Rafael Nadal and headed for the iconic Dunlop Bridge. As the small cars pulled away, the first grid began to line up on the pit lane side of the track, and then the drivers left their cars and lined up on the other side of the track opposite their cars for the race to begin with the raising of the Tennis Stars flag in the tradition of the 24-hour race at 4 p.m. with the run to the cars. From then on, the starting grids alternated around the track so that everyone drove during the Saturday afternoon evening, the Saturday-Sunday night session, and finally on Sunday until 4 p.m. during the day. In some categories, the stewards assigned cars for a final check, during which the technical scrutineers dismantled the cars to make sure that the driver had not used any non-conforming parts or solutions that could have given him a competitive advantage. Fortunately, we found nothing of the sort in any of the cars inspected, but we did come across plenty of remanufactured parts, which goes some way to explaining how even the oldest cars have dared and been able to reach speeds of nearly 200 km per hour before the Mulsanne first chicane. And if you are interested to see the results, visit lemansclassic.com, where you can find out about the competitors in French and English. And what else was on the venue? Unfortunately, it was impossible to see it in such a short time, so I can't tell you, but I can say for sure that the 235,000 spectators who visited the event were not without a spectacle or a program for a single minute. There were concerts, fairs and cars galore. Inside the track, a wide variety of T1 transporters transported the drivers and VIP guests, but also Willys Jeeps and many other interesting and funny vehicles from the 20th century. For those with a little more money in their pockets, the Art Courier auction house offered 120 cars, Johnny Halliday's speedboat, and a host of Le Mans-related relics. Cars in all price ranges were on offer, from the Alfa Sprint at a few €1,000 to the Bugatti Veyron, and from street cars to rally cars and Le Mans prototypes. Meanwhile, the museum named after Luigi Chinetti paid tribute to the centenary with a special exhibition. Alongside the permanent exhibits, cars from a number of other museums and private collections were borrowed to present the history of the race in its fullest. This exhibition opened before this year's 24-hour race and was open until the end of July. Although there were some cars that were not on display this weekend, but were on the track. Of particular interest was a display of 1 to 43 scale models of every car ever raced, with no fewer than 4,478 miniature cars broken down by year and with the winners of each year on a special podium. But the attractions did not end at the track fences, with countless more cars lined up in the spectator car parks and campsites. It was surreal to see the Aston Martins or Lamborghini Espadas parked next to the tiled tents, and there were many of them. Because this event was not just a car race, but a collective celebration of the best years of motoring.